Chapter 67. Karen stopped struggling instantly. Was Charlie threatening her with her mother's life? How dare he? She was so angry. She raised her head and glared at him. The hatred in her eyes was adamant. However, Charlie did not care about Karen's look at all. He said proudly, "Karen, how much can you make in a year at Innovative Tech? How much can your president make? Kevin can't give you anything. When you come back to me, I promise I won't let you work so hard every day." She. Did Charlie really think that all women in the world could only live by depending on him? Karen really wanted to slap this arrogant man hard to let him feel sorry for his stupid words. According to her temper, she would do this. But when she thought of her mother lying in the hospital and Kevin's safety, she had to give up. "Karen, come back to my side. Let's start over." Charlie pressed Karen's head into his arms and said affectionately, "Amelia, please accompany Mrs. Kyle back to the lounge." Karen was about to resist when a cold voice came from behind them. She was very familiar with this voice. For many times, this voice gave her hope and warmed her when she was in the dark. However, the voice now was as cold as ice. It was so cold that one could not help but tremble. Being frightened, Karen pushed Charlie away. When she looked up, she saw Kevin was standing there expressionlessly. When Kevin looked at her, he tried to conceal his real emotions, but there was a hint of anger in his eyes. Karen was afraid of his look. She wanted to explain, but she couldn't say a word. Amelia immediately ran over and said, "Mrs. Kyle, please go to the lounge with me." But Karen did not move. She looked at Kevin with stubborn eyes, as she was trying to convey her thoughts to him. She wanted to explain and tell him the truth. Since Kevin appeared, Karen and Kevin had had their eyes on each other. No one could break into their world. Charlie, who had been ignored for a long time, finally couldn't stand such an atmosphere. He stood in front of Karen. "Kevin, if you have the guts, come to me. Why do you have to bully a woman?" He shouted loudly, trying to attract Kevin's attention. However, without looking at him, Kevin's eyes were still fixed on Karen. They looked at each other, but they could not read each other. "Amelia!" After a long time, Kevin shouted angrily again, "Kevin!" Karen wanted to talk to Kevin, but this time, Kevin turned his head away from her. There were people everywhere. Karen did not want to argue with Kevin here, especially in front of Charlie. She had to leave with Amelia and find time to explain it to Kevin later. As soon as Karen left, Charlie laughed. "Kevin, you have seen Karen's attitude. I am the person in her heart. Why do you force her to stay with you?" Kevin narrowed his eyes slightly and just looked at Charlie coldly. Even if he did not prove anything, Kevin was far better than Charlie. Every time he saw Kevin, Charlie had an illusion that he would be swallowed by him. But why did the president of a small company have such a powerful aura? Charlie could not figure it out. Charlie couldn't win, so he had to say something first. He said disdainfully, "Kevin, as long as you divorce Karen, we'll take back what we said before. Gook Corp will cooperate with Innovative Tech. You can still take your position as president." "What if I don't agree?" After a while, Kevin slightly raised his lips and said with a grin on his face. Those who were not familiar with Kevin, after hearing his tone and expression, would think that he was chatting casually with others. However, Nick, who had been with him for more than 10 years, understood that this was the real anger of their big boss. For so many years, it was rare for Kevin to show this kind of smile. Nick vaguely remembered that it was Polestar who was suffering last time. Kevin showed a similar grin at the person who bullied him. That person seemed to have disappeared for a long time. Charlie did not know that. He said arrogantly and proudly, "Karen and I grew up together. We have been in love for many years and we won't leave each other." Charlie didn't notice that the grin on Kevin's face gradually disappeared. After a long time, Kevin said coldly, "So what? Karen is his wife now." "Ha ha!" Charlie was still ignorant. "But I'm her true love. She's temporarily angry with me. One day she'll come back to me. You'd better divorce her now. At least you can save your dignity in public. When she demands a divorce actively, you'll be the most pathetic man." Kevin nodded as if he had just understood the pros and cons. Charlie thought he was on the verge of victory, but Kevin suddenly laughed again. His smile was full of satire. "What if I don't want to?" Kevin smiled and looked at Charlie coldly. "You!" Kevin's change of attitude caught Charlie off guard. For a moment, he only felt a punch in his ego. He had never met such an ungrateful man in Beeford City. How could a shrimp be so arrogant? Charlie could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. He wanted to make a move on Kevin. But before he took a step, a strong man stopped him. Charlie took a closer look and found that he was part of Kevin's crew. He raised his voice, "Get out of my way." However, the man in front of him was still motionless. "Nick," Kevin spoke. "Mr. Kyle." The man standing in front of Charlie answered respectfully. Kevin continued, "Please send Mr. Charlie out." "Yes." As soon as Kevin finished his words, Nick immediately stepped forward. He first politely nodded to Charlie and then said coldly, "Mister, you are not welcome here. Please leave." After that, he was going to take Charlie out. But before Nick even touched Charlie, Charlie broke out into curses. "F you. Who the f do you think you are?" Kevin had no right to ask him to leave. Did he think he was as powerful as Leo Kyle? Charlie had never been insulted like this before. He was so angry that he completely lost his mind. So he turned his fist, trying to fight back quickly. However, the person he wanted to beat was not Nick, but Kevin, who was standing still beside him. Chapter 68. Kevin did not move at all when Charlie shook his fist at him. He remained calm. Before Charlie's fist could touch Kevin, Nick blocked him and held Charlie's fist tightly. With a little force, Charlie's bones almost cracked. Let go. What the hell do you want to do? Charlie felt that his bones were about to crack, and he was burning with rage. He roared, Kevin, do you want to die? Who the fuck do you think you are? Do you think you are a first-class person like Leo Kyle? Believe it or not, I will make you disappear from this world forever. Looking at Charlie becoming mad, Kevin acted like an outsider. He just watched coldly, but he didn't want to see it anymore. So he gave Charlie a glimpse, turned around, and left. When Charlie saw Kevin was about to leave, he was even more furious. How could he let this bastard leave just like that? Charlie threw another fist at Nick. Nick dodged quickly and kicked him in the abdomen. Charlie was in pain and cried out loud, Kevin, stop, fight me. Ha! Nick laughed after hearing this. Mister, I advise you to stop here. If Mr. Kyle comes, you may even lose your life. Charlie was still unconvinced, thinking that Nick was making fun of him, so he punched again. His fist did not reach Nick. Instead, he was punched back again. After Charlie was punched a few times, the security guards came over just in time. Nick let go of Charlie, turned back, and said to the security guards, What are you guys doing? How can you let a thug without invitation in? Mr. Black? Forget it. Nick waved his hand. Throw him out. Who dares to move? I am invited by Leo Kyle from Rovio Corporation, Inc. Who dares to hurt me? Charlie was too angry, completely ignoring the security guard's attitude towards Nick. He even wanted to get Leo Kyle on his side. However, he did not know that he had already offended Leo Kyle. Nick sneered and said, Tell Mr. who asks him to leave. Mr. Gook, Leo Kyle does not welcome you. Please leave now, or don't blame us for walking you out. The fight just now had attracted a lot of people's attention. At this time, the security guard spoke loudly. Others had already begun to point at Charlie. Charlie didn't give up and said, Do you know who I am? I am Charlie, the young master of the Gook Corp from Beeford City. Don't you dare to ask me to leave. I don't know, Mr. from Beeford City. We only know our boss, Leo Kyle, Rovio Corporation, Inc. Mr. Gook, please cooperate with us, otherwise we will take action. The security guard's words were more embarrassing than the punches he received. At this moment, he finally realized that he had suffered a significant loss today. Not only did he embarrass himself, but also he impressed Leo Kyle in a ridiculous way. In order to continue to cooperate with Rovio Corporation, Inc. in the future, Charlie decided to endure first and then settle with Kevin afterward. Charlie was followed by the staff to the hall. Guest members cast their attention on Charlie. The mocking sound came into his ears as if he was a complete clown tonight. He clenched his fists and frowned his eyebrows. His eyes were fierce and sinister. He thought to himself, Karen and Kevin, both of you don't know your place. Don't blame me for being ruthless. In the lounge of the banquet, Kevin stood at the door for nearly a minute before pushing the door open and walked in. When Amelia saw him, she went out sensibly and closed the door. Kevin locked the door and looked at Karen gloomily. Karen wanted to explain, but she couldn't say anything when she saw Kevin's gloomy eyes. There seemed to be something stuck in her throat, like the world would collapse if she spoke. You explain. I'm listening. Kevin waited for a long time but did not hear Karen's explanation. He probed her. What could she say to him? Should she tell him what had happened in her family? So he would pity her? Then what? To let him get justice for her? Against the powerful Gook family. What's more, no matter what was behind it, she did violate her promise. She had promised that she would not see Charlie again, but he caught her again. Moreover, Charlie was holding her close just now. She should give him an explanation. She didn't want to say the real reason, but neither want to lie to him. After a long time, Karen did not know where to start. She looked at Kevin. His look was fierce. For a moment, she wished she could sink into the dark and no longer have to worry about the complicated world. However, she didn't, and she couldn't. She opened her mouth but stopped. And this sound was like a horn that broke the silence. Kevin, who had been silent for a long time, seemed impatient. He suddenly stretched out his long arm and pulled her into his arms. His right hand held the back of Karen's head, and the kiss came. He kissed her fiercely. He swallowed all her breaths and bit her lips. Karen tried to push him away, which in turn made him kiss even harder. Soon, Karen's lips could no longer satisfy Kevin. A fierce kiss gradually went to her neck, while biting her skin all the way as if it was a punishment. Kevin, don't. As soon as her mouth was free, Karen yelled, but this couldn't stop Kevin. His big palms moved up rapidly from her waist. He grabbed the shoulder straps of her dress and pulled it hard. There was a ripping sound. Karen suddenly felt a chill, and she exclaimed, Don't. She reached out to protect her chest, but Kevin was faster than her. His hands had slipped down from her collarbone. His hot kiss, from top to bottom, continued to spread down from her neck, leaving marks one after another. A strong fear attacked Karen. She pushed, refused, and whimpered. These days, she had thought about how close they would get, but she had never thought that it would be like this. They shouldn't hurt each other so coldly. Stop, Kevin, she pleaded with tears in her eyes for the last time. Her voice sounded helpless. His violent kiss stopped abruptly, and the sudden release freed her. Kevin looked up at her. Chapter 69. Karen cried. Her tears dropped on her fair skin, which reminded Kevin of what he did. She looked at him with her teary eyes, which were crystal clear enough to reflect his actions after he lost control. Kevin was stunned for a moment. Was the man who lost control in front of Karen really him? How could I lose control like that? Kevin couldn't understand. He didn't know why he became like that. Kevin sighed deeply, then gently approached Karen and carefully kissed away the tears that were on her face. Her tears were bitter, very bitter. The bitterness filled Kevin's heart, and his emotions turned to guilt that he had never felt before. "I'm sorry," he said. After saying that, Kevin turned around and left in a hurry. The door slammed shut behind Kevin, which blocked Karen's vision, and she could no longer see Kevin. She lowered her head and looked at her torn dress. She felt so sad that her tears rolled down her cheeks again. She took a deep breath and forced her tears back into her eyes. She stopped herself from crying. She leaned against the door, and she held her face with her hands. Then, she took a deep breath. Kevin came into her life suddenly when she was not ready at all. As time passed, she began to care for him. She cared about how she was in his eye and whether or not he knew her past. Now, she didn't even have the courage to tell him about what happened in the Midwest. She could not dare to imagine how he would think of her after he knew what happened. Will he misunderstand her and think less of her, just like the rest? Karen was feeling very insecure, so she didn't dare to mention anything to Kevin, because she didn't want him to know that she came from a family that was so terrible. She even worried that if he knew the truth, he would probably break up with her. Buzz. Suddenly, the mobile phone vibrated and buzzed on the coffee table, which startled Karen. She dragged her skirt and picked up her phone. A strange number appeared on the screen, which was not in her contact list, but Karen still recognized this number. How could she not remember this mobile phone number, which belonged to someone who used to be so close to her? The phone was still ringing, but Karen's fingers were frozen, and she did not move her fingers. She was having a hard time deciding if she should answer it or not. After thinking for a while, Karen decided to listen to what the person has to say. At last, Karen slid her fingers through her phone screen and answered the phone. After she picked up the call, no one said anything. It was so quiet that they could hear each other's breathing through the phone. After some time, Christine spoke first. "Karen, are you free tomorrow? Let's meet up." Christine's gentle voice passed through the phone into Karen's ear, which was still as charming as ever. Karen still remembered that Faye used to describe Christine's voice. It was made to seduce men on the phone. No wonder Charlie was seduced by her so quickly. "Karen." Karen did not respond. The person on the other side of the phone tried to call for her again. 3 years ago, when Karen knew that Christine plotted the incident of her being attacked by cyberbullies, she promised herself that she could not keep her in her life anymore. Christine was already dead to her. Now, after she received a call from Christine 3 years later, the resentment, hatred, and all kinds of emotions in her heart had slowly faded away. There was no need to punish herself for something someone else did. Karen thought to herself, "Karen, I want to talk to you about Mother." When Karen heard Christine mentioning their mother, she remembered that their mother was sick, but she did not ask about her for the past 3 years. Compared to the things that her mother did to her as she had no choice, her sister was crueler. "Tell me about the time and place." In the end, Karen compromised. She needed to know how her mother was doing. "I've heard there was a restaurant that serves local cuisine at Peace Road in North Hill City. Let's meet at noon tomorrow, okay?" Tomorrow is Saturday. Karen didn't have to work. Since she was free, she agreed to meet Christine. After hanging up the phone, Karen stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself in the mirror. The strap of her gown had been torn by Kevin, which exposed her fair skin. If someone saw her like this, they would gossip about it. She could not go out like this. There were no extra clothes to change. Karen had to find a way to cover it up, so no one will be able to see it. She was a fashion designer. She used to cut and sew clothes when she was doing fashion design. She was very experienced in changing the design of clothes. She would look fine after she modified her gown. She quickly came up with an idea. She tied the shawl into a bow tie and tied it together with the shoulder strap so that both the broken shoulder strap and the hickey that Kevin left on her neck were covered. Nice! After looking at her modified dress, Karen was very satisfied. After feeling reassured, she opened the door and went out. However, she never expected that Kevin, who should have been gone a long time ago, was just standing right at the door. The moment she opened the door, she found Kevin was standing there. The two of them looked at each other and no one said anything. They did not know what to say. The situation was very awkward. Finally, Karen said, I want to go back first." She lowered her head and she didn't look at him. She couldn't tell what kind of strange repulsive feeling she was feeling in her heart. "All right," he answered softly. He reached out his hand to grab her hand and they were ready to leave. She wanted to pull away, but she didn't. She is his wife, isn't she? She will just assume what happened just now was just him using his rights on her as her husband. When Karen was still justifying Kevin's actions earlier, Kevin had already led her into the car. The driver, Mr. Watson, glanced at the two people who were sitting in the back seat in silence from the rearview mirror and asked cautiously, "Where do you want to go, young master?" "Home." Kevin spat out the word softly. Then he closed his eyes and leaned on the seat of the car. He pretended to be calm, but his heart was feeling very complicated. Kevin didn't know what happened to him. He used to be someone who had a strong sense of self-control. He still could not believe that he lost control in front of Karen. He had almost become one of those people who hurt Karen. If not for her tears, he might have already done things that he would regret. Fortunately, nothing happened. He did not do anything that could hurt her. Both of them were still on good terms.